marrying into a wealthy family, and then abruptly coming back to apologize. Before I discuss what is going on right now, let me give you some background. 5 years ago, I got divorced from my ex-husband, and that's when my parents severed their relationship with me. I discovered that my ex-husband, Nick, had been unfaithful with his office receptionist while looking through his phone. I had my suspicions for a long time, and one day I made the decision to confirm it and look through. We had been together for nearly 10 years before we were married, having been childhood sweethearts because his parents and my parents were family friends. We had an intermittent relationship after high school, but at the age of 22, our parents began pressuring us to get married. That's when I realized that our marriage was over, and it was really tough for me. We did. But after we got married, things didn't really work out, and we would argue a lot. Even then, I never thought about being unfaithful, but he made that choice. I was so hurt to learn about his affair that I made the decision to leave our home that day. Naturally, my first instinct was to go to my parents' house, but I suppose Nick had already spoken to them because he must have assumed that I would go there. I still remember standing outside my parents' door, pleading with them to let me in, so I could stay with them for a few days, until I could find a place for myself. However, they simply told me that they were not going to entertain this because Nick was still my husband, and we could make it work regardless of what had happened. He was pretty desperate to stop me from leaving, so he asked my parents not to let me in, but they actually didn't. They claimed that Nick had admitted to being unfaithful when he called them, but apparently my parents believed that a marriage cannot be destroyed by one person, so they were indirectly blaming me for everything. I wasn't even shocked because that's exactly how they had always treated me. Even before I discovered that Nick had been cheating on me, I had told my parents about my marital issues on multiple occasions and that I no longer thought it was a good idea to stay with him. However, they consistently told me that I was too ambitious and that I did not devote enough time to my marriage, which is why it was failing. I have a few good friends, and even though I wasn't ready to break the news of my divorce at the prom time, I chose to visit one of them and tell her everything I was going through. She was gracious enough to let me stay with them, but even they began to imply that I was equally at fault, and I had had enough and decided to leave immediately. I spent a few weeks living with her. During that time, I talked to a lawyer, filed for divorce, and began looking for an apartment where I could live. At that time, my parents had no involvement with me and only tried to get in touch with me to let me know how big of a mistake I was making by leaving my unfaithful partner. My friends were the only people who were there for me emotionally and supported me during that time. My parents were on his side and kept telling me to forgive him, so I blocked them from my life. Eventually, they stopped attempting to contact me either. My husband, Nick, kept trying to contact me, saying that we could still work things out, and that all we needed was some marriage counseling to move on from this. He also kept apologizing as if it would make things better. After everything was as said and done, I stopped communicating with all of these people. I also stopped communicating with my parents, which I don't regret. We do occasionally cross paths when we go to events that other family members host, but we ignore each other. I know they don't regret what they did to me, so I'm okay with this. Fast forward to 5 years later, and I'm engaged to my boyfriend, Charlie, whom I've been seeing for 3 years, and they have been some of the most amazing years of my life. He approached me at a restaurant, specifically his restaurant, when I was out with my friends. I didn't find out until much later that he was the restaurant's owner, but we went on a few dates and quickly became quite serious about one another. Within a few weeks, I discovered that he not only owned the restaurant, but also had a similar business background. His father owns one of the largest bakery chains in the state, so he developed a keen interest in all things culinary as a child. This led to him opening his own restaurant, which I found impressive, but to be honest, it didn't really matter to me because I'm a working woman, and I intend to continue working after marriage. I've never been after his money, but I can't. Say the same for my parents, because as soon as they learned that I was with this guy, they wasted no time in contacting me in an attempt to re-establish themselves. This occurred last week, a few days after I declared my engagement on social media. I assume that a relative took the initiative to inform my parents that I was engaged once more, and they must have done their own research and learned about Charlie and his family. Almost 3 days after I made my announcement, they contacted me via email. They didn't mention anything about Charlie or the type of family he came from in that email. At least they were smart enough to do that. They then said that they had learned that I was engaged and wanted to congratulate me. They also wanted to apologize for their previous behavior and said that they regretted not contacting me over the past couple of years. but they wanted to make it up to me by attending my wedding. I decided not to respond to them because I was suspicious that they were only contacting me after my engagement. If they truly wanted to be a part of my life again, they would have contacted me long before, and they did again. In the second email, they somewhat revealed themselves by telling me that they had read a lot about Charlie and his family and were really impressed with the type of guy I had chosen. It really annoyed me, but it was going to get worse because they claimed in that email that they had chosen to contact me because they were so proud of me, because now I was going to be part of such a prestigious lineage. It was all just pretentiousness, and I was also offended that despite my many accomplishments, they were more interested in the fact that I had managed to marry into a wealthy family. I'm not sure why they sent that email, and I don't think they realized that this will only make things worse for them. Still, after that email, I simply blocked them, and everything was peaceful for a few days, until last night. I moved into Charlie's apartment about a year ago, and I haven't invited many family members over here because only a few of my close friends and cousins know where I live, so they couldn't have told my parents. Nevertheless, my parents somehow found out, and when I questioned them, they didn't explain how they arrived at our house. Charlie and I were both quite taken aback when we noticed them standing outside. He is aware of my parents' entire history regarding my divorce and their reactions to it, so it's safe to say that he disapproves of it. He was the one who opened the door, and as soon as he saw them, he called me to speak with them. Fortunately, he stayed by my side the entire time, holding my hand as I spoke to my parents. They began by expressing their regret and telling me that they didn't want to give the impression that they were more concerned with Charlie and his family than they were with my forgiveness. They were also being honest about the fact that they had attempted to contact me multiple times over the previous few years, but had always been unsuccessful because they knew I would be upset with them for their actions. 5 whole years have passed since my divorce, and I no longer need them. I was very stern with them, telling them that I wanted them to leave without much of a fuss. I told them that their past behavior wasn't justified, and even if they had reached out, I wouldn't have forgiven them, and I don't plan on forgiving them now. Then, out of nowhere, my father raised his voice and told me that I was being too proud and arrogant, and that I couldn't just treat them like this because now I was marrying into a well-off family. This really upset me because it was completely uncalled for and absolutely untrue. I was about to turn around and close the door. I told them that if they showed up again, I would have to call the police. I told them this wasn't about me marrying into a wealthy family, but rather about them and their actions. They had 5 years to change their ways, but they were still the same insensitive people, and I didn't want anything to do with them. After I said that, they stopped talking to me and began talking to Charlie, telling him that he needed to watch out for my attitude because that was what had ended my previous marriage. They also went out of their way to mention that Nick had cheated on me with the office receptionist, whom he had known for a few months, and that they were now happily married with a child. They said that I would never succeed and have a happy family with anyone while I was still just engaged, because I was constantly focused on proving how much better I was than everyone. Apparently, I had done that in the past by putting too much emphasis on my career rather than my marriage, and now I was repeating that pattern by acting superior, just because Charlie was financially stable. My fiancé wasn't having any of it. He told my parents that he wasn't willing to take relationship advice from people like them, and that I could be proud of our success if I wanted to, because it was true that he was financially secure, and that I was getting married to him. He also told them that if they believed I had an attitude issue, that was something for us to work through, not them, and that we weren't worried about what they thought. So they shouldn't worry about us either. His last statement, which truly left me speechless, was that he was happy that my ex had fallen in love with the woman he had an affair with, and that, despite having 5 years to think back on their behavior toward me, they were still supporting Nick rather than me. But it didn't matter now. I honestly didn't think this would go any further. But this morning I got a phone call from my paternal grandparents, who began lecturing me about how poorly my fiancé and I had behaved with my parents. He shut the door while my parents continued to react emotionally outside, and after a while they left us alone. It was a bit of a shock because my grandparents have generally been on good terms with me, despite the fact that they have been in contact with my parents for the past 5 years, and have always taken a neutral position on the matter. But now, they feel that I should apologize to them, particularly in light of what Charlie told them about our wealth. They claim that my parents may have made a mistake once in the past, but other than that, they had always made an effort to treat me well, though I'm not sure how accurate that is, since my relationship with my parents has been somewhat tense and challenging since I was a young child. It is true that they have always supported me and done everything in their power to provide me with a comfortable life, which I cannot deny. My grandparents have emphasized that I should be thankful to them for this, and I can no longer just talk confidently about how much money I have, because in reality, my in-laws are the ones who are wealthy, not me, even though it was extremely uncomfortable for my parents. They told me that the least I could have done was to confront them, even if I didn't want to forgive them at the time. I tried to explain to them that Charlie was the one who had responded to them because I wasn't even interested in talking to them. However, they said it didn't matter who said it as long as I had let it go. My grandparents told me that there were many other factors as well, and they said a lot of things about me. But they said that none of it mattered and that they only cared about my behavior. They would talk to my parents separately about anything they did not think was appropriate regarding their behavior, which eventually made me a little agitated because I felt like we were talking in circles and they weren't ready to understand my point of view. However, they later told me that a man, they simply hung up. Of course, I love Charlie and don't think he's done anything wrong, but after seeing my grandparents' reaction, I'm seriously questioning whether I'm in the wrong for letting my wealthy fiance criticize my parents because of their modest financial situation. Hello everyone! Thank you so much for all of the support in the comments. It means a lot to me. After talking to a few friends about it and reading the comments here, Charlie and I have decided that we owe my family nothing, not even an apology. They were the ones who were constantly complaining that I was becoming too proud and self-important simply because I was marrying into a wealthy family. I don't think I've done anything wrong, and neither has my fiance, so I don't need to feel bad about anything. I've talked to him about it too, and he's made it clear that he won't apologize to anyone who has treated me poorly, not just once, but every opportunity they get. Even our most recent encounter, when they showed up, was extremely inappropriate. Because despite my telling them that I didn't want to speak with them, and that I didn't intend to forgive them, they refused to leave, making me appear as though Charlie, the unkind one, told me that he had known my parents were problematic people because of what I had told him earlier. But after meeting and talking to them, he realized that they were deeply unpleasant, and he would not advise me to forgive them or speak to them at any point. I agree, and when I told him about what my grandparents had said, he made a fairly valid point. He told me that so far, they had stayed out of the drama because it was convenient for them, but as soon as my parents were hurt, they intervened without hesitation because they were okay with it as long as I was the one being affected. However, as soon as their beloved son was offended, they came after me, which was something I should consider before I took their words seriously. After giving it some thought, he definitely makes a good point every time I've tried to speak to my parents over the past 5 years. I guess it was just a way for them to maintain good relations with all of us and be diplomatic, but I suppose they don't plan on being diplomatic anymore because it's very clear that their priority is my father and not me. When I asked my grandparents about my relationship with my parents, they would tell me that I had to work it out myself and that they didn't want to get involved. Eventually, I stopped trying to vent to them because I knew they wouldn't entertain it. I'm glad I have Charlie by my side because so far, it seems like he is more upset about all of this than I am, which is pretty sweet because it shows how much he cares for me. Update 2. A week has passed since my grandparents contacted me to let me know that what I did with my parents was wrong and that I need to apologize to them. I didn't respond to them for the past week, so they decided to try to get in touch with me once more. I had blocked my parents and grandparents, so they made a new email account and wrote to me to express their disappointment with the way I had handled this matter. They said they had discovered that I had blocked them, which surprised them, since they had always done their best to support me over the previous 5 years. They now understood that their diplomatic choice had been a poor one, and they ought to have told me directly that my parents were correct about everything, and that I did have an attitude issue that I needed to address. Since they were unable to think of a valid reason to be critical of me, they simply began to bring up everything my parents had said about me. Of course, they had to get personal without cause, even though, up until today, they had. I found that email to be very frustrating, and when I showed it to Charlie, he simply told me that he was glad we hadn't apologized or reached out to anyone among these people, because obviously they didn't deserve it. They were all self-centered, and if anyone had an attitude problem, it was my family. They always insisted that my parents and I had different opinions on everything, so they couldn't say who was right and who was wrong. I haven't replied to that email, and I don't intend to do so, either because I don't think it's worth my energy to argue with them, or explain why I'm correct. The truth is that they will never believe that I'm correct because they only want to paint me as the one in the wrong, and they will keep coming up with reasons to do so. They're just upset that I'm getting married to Charlie, that I'm going to be financially secure now, and that they won't be able to benefit from my situation. Marriage is really strange because Charlie and I believe that if they truly wanted our forgiveness, they should have tried to encourage us and be extra kind to us instead of acting this way. Their resentment and bitterness are only hurting themselves, and they may not even be aware of it or may not care. In any case, it doesn't matter because they won't be in my life at any cost. Update 3. 2 months have passed since my last update, and I essentially forgot about whatever had been happening with my parents and grandparents because I wasn't concerned about it. They didn't try to get in touch with me after that, and I became preoccupied with organizing my wedding and a lot of other tasks. 3 days ago, my parents returned to my house, but this time Charlie wasn't there, and I didn't even open the door when I realized that they were standing outside. I told them that I didn't want to waste my time arguing with them again, and that if they didn't leave, I would not think twice about calling the police. That way, things would get really difficult for them. Despite my warnings, my parents remained, and my dad simply began telling me that he didn't want me to accept them back into my life again, or something. They were truly sorry about how they had acted the last time they were here. After careful consideration, they understood that they had only made things worse for themselves by refusing to acknowledge that I wasn't ready to forgive them at this time. They wanted me to know that they would continue to apologize until I forgave them for the numerous times they had let me down. My mother even went so far as to say that at that point, I felt obligated to open the door and explain to them that I didn't know what to say or even how to feel about the situation, but all I knew was that I wasn't ready to deal with them right now. I told them as politely and civilly as I could that they didn't need to keep showing up. They were willing to wait however long it took, even if it meant waiting their entire lives just for my forgiveness. I apologized and said that I just wanted some space away from them. Maybe in a few years, if I wanted to, I would get in touch with them. But for now, I just wanted them to leave me alone. To be honest, I'm not sure if I will eventually get in touch with them, but I mentioned it to them for the sake of it, and they seemed to feel better about it. My mother also said that she would be looking forward to hearing from me, even though she began to cry, and told me that she and my father had always been very prideful and too stubborn to admit that they hadn't always been the best parents to me, especially around the time of my divorce. She said that they had been misled and influenced into thinking that I was the one with attitude issues, and that if it didn't happen in a few years, I would be able to forgive them. Their attitude toward me has always been so perplexing. Sometimes they feel that I'm not wrong, and other times they believe that Nick was right about me. Personally, I don't think that's a good reason because, for heaven's sake, they should know how I am as a person, but they didn't really give me enough time as a child, and even as a teenager, so it's not surprising that they don't. In any case, that is their fault, not mine. But I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I told them that whatever had happened in the past was already done and couldn't be changed. However, if they truly wanted my forgiveness, they could at least avoid me and give themselves some time and space to heal. They didn't say anything else after that, and they simply quietly left after I told Charlie about it when he got home. I don't know how to feel about that right now, so I'm just trying not to think about my parents. I'm putting all of my energy into planning my wedding, and I hope it goes well. Update 4. I got married last week, and it was an absolute blast. No one from my immediate family was there. He told me that the situation could have turned out worse, but he was glad that it didn't. Naturally, since they weren't invited, I invited my maternal grandparents. However, due to their out-of-state residence and my grandfather's numerous health problems, they were unable to attend, so there weren't many members of my family at the wedding. Nevertheless, I didn't mind because I knew that Charlie would be by my side, and his family had essentially accepted me into their family, so I'm really thankful that my parents contacted me a few times. Days after the wedding, I received a burner phone call informing me that they had heard from my cousins that I was now married. Although I had not invited them to the wedding, they wanted to express their happiness for me and wish me luck in my new life. I didn't say much, just thanked them and let it go. Many of you must have felt that I shouldn't have even replied to them or entertained them the last time, that I should have contacted the police when they came to visit. But in all honesty, that would have only increased my frustration and created more tension and unavoidably caused more drama. So I believe it's much better that I'm not close to them. I doubt I ever will be, but at least we don't have each other at our necks. We're always maintaining neutrality, and I believe that's the best course of action for now.